Is it okay? I start. I mean, no.
Please do. Yes.
Okay. So I would like to explain my situation. This lay life, as you call it. It's there are several commitments that I have, right? So I have my job commitments, I have my family commitments, I have all the extra work that I do. I do some research on top of that, and there are some various hobbies that I would like to continue doing, and various other engagements.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, there's a lot of things that I'm committed to, actually. And the way I see what helps me in terms of the hindrances, right, the 5 hindrances. So, for example, to avoid sloth and torpor, I do have a lot of energy, and I invested in various fields, not just Dhamma, but various fields. And for example, especially to avoid remorse, right? Restlessness and remorse. I tend to arrange or manage my time in very tight time slots. So I would do 2 hours of writing articles, 2 hours of preparing for this, 1 hour of this. So I have my day is pretty well organized, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the 2 things that I kind of have a problem with, restlessness and remorse, because I have so many things. And this is what helps, really arranging things neatly and then sticking to the schedule, however, to the greatest extent possible. If something comes up, then I don't feel remorseful about it or regretting that I did not do certain things because I did my best. Actually, I think that. But then I would also like to arrange my Dhamma practice, in a time slot, in a tight. There are certain things that you develop, that you practice throughout the day, regardless of what I'm doing. I will develop mindfulness and discernment of various mental states that I'm in. So I do that constantly. I don't need a separate time slot for that. But at the same time, I feel this urgency that, I need to develop this field as well. I mean, not as well, but primarily so. This is the most important thing that I'm doing. My primary goal or aspiration is Dhamma and the development of this awareness, enlightenment factors. I was just, briefly today I was looking at these again. So I don't have, for example, the problems with the.
So what's stopping you?
The question is, the mindful. So I would like you to actually. I was hoping that you could give me like some structured advice on how to practice. Let's say how to set aside a certain amount of time each day and do concentrated practice for the things that I need to develop. Maybe I don't know. What would you say? What should I do exactly in that? Let's say, I don't know, does it help to have half an hour set aside in the morning and half an hour in the evening? And what exactly should I be doing in that half or 1 hour a day? I was hoping you could give me some guidelines on how to do it in a structured way, very targeted.
Right, well, if you do want something to structure, make it like a sutta study, obviously. Because the knowledge is what stays with you even when you're busy or occupied or overwhelmed by other things, not your meditation technique. So understanding will stay with you throughout the day of that, the clarity you gained on account of pondering on things and reading the suttas and so on. But another question I do have to sort of get back to is, you say remorse, restlessness and remorse is a hindrance, so you structure your day so you don't experience it. Why would you be remorseful? Are you doing something immoral?
Oh no! I'm
No, exactly. So what is the remorse there for? If you're not doing anything bad?
well, that you haven't accomplished everything that you're supposed to have, because that kind of affects the whole department then. And we're looking at publications and how.
But
how
why didn't you accomplish everything you had? Is it because you didn't try hard enough, or because simply that was physically not possible?
Well, poor time management. So that's what I'm working now.
Right.
Working.
Poor time management, which is kind of part of work. So you kind of work and learn and get better. Yeah. So in other words, your remorse is not very rational. There is no rational basis, like lack of virtue, unwholesome behavior, intentional mistake to be remorseful for, yet you're remorseful.
But slacking off. I mean, like.
Well, but are you slacking off, or are you just can't keep up with that level? Which one is it?
Sometimes, it's just.
To me, sounds like you're not. You probably have too much, which is why you can't do everything.
Yes.
So thinking that you must manage that remorse by further distraction, it's going to make your remorse even worse. Because everything now becomes a distraction from remorse. And if you don't keep the level of engagement that you're sort of occupied with, remorse comes back. In other words, you're trying to outrun it, but you run out of energy. You have to, and then it catches up with you.
Yes, and then I collapse.
Yeah, so that's the problem. And now another problem is that on top of that, you want to add the Dhamma practice as another occupation during the day to keep you on top of the remorse.
Yes.
And that's not going to happen. Especially if you start reading the suttas and structuring the way I said, you'll be more aware of your remorse, even when there is nothing remorseful that you did. So that's why the hindrances, yes, if there is a factual basis for remorse, guilt, as in, unwholesome behavior, that's the bit where you confess, you acknowledge the mistake and so on, but the rest, you have to endure it. That's the point on the hindrances. They are irrational. So you mustn't take them at the face value as, oh no, this remorse is fine, yes, I am guilty and I must deal with it. No, you must actually just endure it as such and not try to outrun it either. That's why hindrances, they don't really care about anything else except to move you. That's their only concern. They want you to make you act on account of them. Whether it's restlessness, remorse, sensual desire, ill will, doubt, sloth, they want you to act out of it. That's it. The goal is accomplished when you do. So you don't overcome hindrances by structuring your day so you don't become aware of them. You overcome them by not acting out of them throughout your day.
Not acting out on feeling this.
So the remorse arises and you just have to endure it. Well, first you can revise your mind and check, have I done anything unwholesome? By body, speech or mind, intentional and otherwise? No. Remorse is still there. Okay. That's the practice now. So you want to incorporate the Dhamma part in your busy day? That's the Dhamma part. Endure the remorse on account of basically not being able to keep up with the projected sense of duty and everything else.
Yeah.
And that's it.
In one of your talks you said how important it was to feel contentment, like this internal contentment that is not based on anything external. It's just this general feeling of, I'm all right.
Yeah.
This is how I understood it.
Yeah, it is.
And then mentioned something that I thought was very much connected with what we were just discussing. Right.
I don't remember what I said.
You said it's so hard to be content with yourself when there are so many obligations that are piling up and you can't keep up and you haven't done everything that you should have done and there are just new things coming in all the time. She also has a very stressful job. Would you like to say something about it?
Also, very stressful job and a lot of things I want to do in my spare time, but I keep running out of time. But I'm not as structured as she is. I get less things done in one day than she does. So time management is a big problem for me.
Yeah, well, it's all relative, really. Like the amount of things you do in a day It's again, what's the measure for that? Who's the measure? What's the criteria? Because you might end up doing everything and the mind still wants to do more, or the mind will still find to do more. So the contentment won't come from you structuring your day perfectly or meeting every deadline in time. It will basically come from you being able to draw a line for yourself. So being able to keep your mind from sort of overspilling and becoming irrational on account of duty and everything else, that's where the contentment will come from. And that takes development internally. So in a way, I'm saying basically being able to say no to yourself to some extent, to your own mind. Because deep down you already know that you're doing like well enough. But yes, the mind can always focus on the lack, not enough, could be better, could be this. And that becomes a habit because you keep letting it focus on that. And then that becomes your pretty much your viewpoint. Always finding fault in your own, or basically always regarding your own actions and results and behavior as not enough. And that's a mental habit. That's not a factual state of things. What's enough is completely relative.
How do you change that?
Well,
stop thinking on what you didn't do and start focusing on what you did do.
Yeah, well, you already know what you did. So you change that by choosing to attend to that side of things. And when the mind pressures you to think about things you didn't do and all the, irrational sense of guilt, that's what you have to endure, that discomfort. But see, because people don't want to endure any form of discomfort, they give in to the mind, thinking about these doubtful matters and so on, hoping it will reach the resolution so it will free them from the discomfort. But practically speaking, they just feed the animal further, and that creates in further discomfort down the line. So instead of waiting for the discomfort to pile up, you have an option basically to endure that discomfort in a form of mind that's being said no to. But if you don't want to endure that, then you pay the price later with more discomfort, when the mind is fully overwhelmed by the hindrances and doubt and guilt and so on, and fault finding.
You make this into a kind of meditation, so you...
I was just going to say, that is actually exactly what samadhi is, yeah. Keeping your mind in check, composing it, not letting it spill out and take you with it.
So in terms of these enlightenment factors, right? So you have the mindfulness, you have the discrimination of mental states, you see that this is happening, you are clear about what's going on, and then you apply concentration in terms of enduring, focusing on the body. Is that what you would suggest doing?
No, I'd suggest what I just suggested. So if it gets too much, yes, set some time aside per day, and don't use it to sort of ignore or escape things, but use it just to compose your mind on what's right there. And that is, what's right there is the pressure of duty that you are not doing while you're meditating. So you don't want to be trying to escape that. You want to be containing it. And that's your practice. So you start doing it in that measured sense, in a controlled environment, but the more you do it like that, the more you'll be able to do it in less controlled environment. Obviously now you can't just overnight, having had a busy life, overwhelmed from all angles and responsibilities and duties, you can't just overnight stop your mind from moving. But you can certainly make a gradual training of it. But again, the point is to recognize your situation and train in regard to it, not train at the expense of it. And by that I mean, okay, so I'll compose my mind in practice so I don't have to deal with these things. One way or the other, something would be pressuring your mind. One way or the other, something will be trying to pull it. One way or the other, hindrances are there unless you're an arahant. So one way or the other, same thing needs to be dealt with by everyone. That's your mind moving on account of basically hindrances and emotions.
And then you become more resilient to such states, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I have something that is connected, because it all goes into these 7 enlightenment factors. So mindfulness, discrimination of discernment of mental state, and then energy and concentration. But then there are 3, which I was hoping you could help me or help us develop: the rapture, tranquility, and equanimity. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you evoke those feelings of rapture
Right. Well, you don't really. They're the result of developing the previous factors. So when your mindfulness is developed, you obviously, within your mindfulness, when you contemplate things, you do so in a clearer manner. So that's how you're developing that investigation of factors, how it's translated. You can't be investigating certain topic, trying to come to the bottom of the meaning and understand it if you're not mindful of it. So it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They're basically developed one through the other. So you will get energy, for example, to practice or whatever, when you know what the practice is. So it's easy to sort of become inspired to do something when you know exactly what you need to do and what the result will be. So the investigation of factors can clarify that for you, then the goal becomes clearer, then the energy arises on its own. Because now you know what you need to do. And same, joy on account of it arises on its own. And then the tranquility, because you're already removed from unwholesome states, practicing in the right direction, will follow. And equanimity is the result of it. You don't evoke equanimity. That's basically when you complete everything else, you are equanimous.
Yeah, it's strange how when I spend time in a monastery, for example, with you guys, then for a while after and during that time, I feel that this probably is what I would say rapture and tranquility is like an underlying, it's like one underlying tone to everything else that's happening. It feels like being protected somehow against, letting your mind run wild with these various, it's like being, I don't know, in a sort of a balanced, lovely feeling of, I don't know, in tranquility probably, and so, and then it runs out. Then I run out of this fuel, and then I have to keep coming, but I don't know, I was hoping, I thought this was, it's not connected to, it's probably that I really am removed from everything else and I focus on what I think is my top priority in life, and I spend time with people whose top priority is also the same thing in the monastic community, and then this gives me, great joy really, but then it wears out when I'm in daily life. After
well, that's the thing, you have to see basically that it's not the enlightenment factor that comes from you, because that would not wear out. You might be resembling the idea of it, but the fact is it depends on the circumstances, that when those change, it runs out, it cannot stay. So it's not like to say, oh, you must never experience that or something. There's nothing wrong with it, but you should certainly not conflate it. Because sometimes people think, okay, see, when I was in the monastery, this joy was great, everything felt effortless, energy was there, because everybody was doing the same thing, it was so inspiring. So all I need to do is place this physical body in the monastery and the work will be done for me by that inspiration. Even that will run out. That happens to people as well. They come and they think that being in the monastery will sort of makes the practice persist on a certain level all the time, and it doesn't. When the honeymoon period is over, you're back onto what you've been carrying internally before you came to the monastery, and you realize, okay, that's what you need to deal with. Like whether you're outside or the inside, doesn't matter. So you can use that inspiration, that joy that you get, to inspire you to develop it on your own, but not to inspire you to project it even more onto the external circumstances and just try to manage those.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think I got exactly what I was hoping to get, the answer, how to do it and what to do. So,
right,
wonderful.
yeah, there you go.
If I may just add a little bit something to this discussion. and I fear that I might sound perhaps as a broken record. I think something that I've mentioned already, I think at least twice. We find ourselves in a similar setting. We're both embedded in the academic framework, and we're both very much interested in pursuing the Dhamma. And it's just, this is not necessarily a question, more of a commentary, but I do feel this, that there is this need or craving, a very problematic word in this particular milieu, but maybe potentially a noble craving for enhancing the Dhamma practice in some sort of a intermediary or interim state or phase or something.
So
like that.
How would you do that? What are your ideas?
My ideas, okay. So I have been thinking about this quite a lot. So the Upasaka meetings or the Upasaka setting I found extremely useful and valuable. So the fact that you have at least once per month a meeting of this sort, either online or even preferably in person, but also, I don't know, the ability maybe of, I don't know how this would be carried out, but to intensify somehow the lay involvement in the monastic community. And I think that I'm becoming more and more aware of why having, why the presence of the monastics in the city or in the near vicinity could be immensely beneficial for this particular purpose, because you can have something that's present there for your, on a more regular basis, and can serve as some sort of intermediary between what you do in the context of the city and your job, and then when you are able to go to the monastery and maybe be there. But I don't know, I was thinking of, this group maybe finding ways to do the sutta studies together, or I don't know, joint sittings, the different possibilities of doing something at the monastery for a weekend or something like that. It could be maybe structured in the groups of 3 to 5 people. I don't know, but having more access to, say, the Dhamma talks and Dhamma discussions of this type, the sutta readings, the joint practice, I don't know, several different options. I have no good ideas. I'm just, I feel that this is an ongoing thing that is going through my mind, and I am thinking about...
all that is, fairly possible. The monastery is here, monks are here, so it's just a question of you finding time and organizing yourselves to come and meditate or stay as guests and partake. There's nothing really extraordinary there except trying to slot it in your busy schedule, which is basically why you want to do this in the first place, because there's too much of other things happening. So
precisely, this is the reason why I said that I would probably sound like a broken record, and you will give me the same advice. I'm aware of this. I'm aware of this completely. Just wanted to maybe point this out so that maybe Martina and Mariana and possibly Freya and Alois also start with a bit of a brainstorming.
Right. Yeah, well, no, that's the thing. Like the whole group, how many of you are? Yeah, you can certainly. Either something yourselves that would revolve around Dhamma, suttas, study, or involving the monastery one way or the other. But it's not really. It doesn't sound like something that's impossible to do.
Yeah, I think we should definitely do this. There's a few of us who read the suttas, and it doesn't have to be about the suttas necessarily, but at least it gives you some sort of framework. When you say, okay, let's focus on the sutta today, it was going to probably trigger all sorts of questions about various topics from our own lives anyway. I think it would be wonderful if we could do that. Would you be able to? Would you be willing? So I'm asking venerables, Hiriko and Nyanomoli, would you be willing to come and sit in, listen in, and help us out when we get lost there a bit?
Come where?
To these meetings. I mean, if they're online, because they would probably have to be online now, right? It would be if we had such weekly meetings, maybe, or.
Well, I don't really know. I mean, when I'm available, I can do it, but I cannot certainly commit to it before even knowing how frequently it happens. But that's the thing. You don't want to. I mean, if you have somebody extra join in, that's great. But don't start planning when you haven't even done it with too many requirements. Make it as simple as possible. Something that everybody can do. Not like, oh well, now the monk's busy, so we can't do it. No, that should not make a difference. If you all find time, get together and do it. And if there is a monk available, great. If not, well, you still have something to do. But if you involve too many moving parts before you even start, it's probably not gonna hold.
The first question, a very simple one, is, and the reason why I'm asking it is because I've now read the Dhammapada and am well into Majjhima Nikayas, and I'm occasionally trying to read other Nikayas as well. But I was just curious whether you would have any suggestion as to, how one might approach this more systematically, or would you have any suggestions as to how one might proceed with this endeavor in general? What I mean by this is, when I plunged into the Nikayas, you just go, okay, you read one sutta and then you move to the other and so on and so forth. And eventually I had to go back and start doing like these comprehensive notes, because you have so many cross references and you just tend to forget many of the things, and a certain key or a suggestion as to how one might go about doing this so that it would...
Again, the sole purpose of it is to understand the meaning of it. So if having a systematic approach aids that's fine, but don't sort of lose perspective and become sort of too concerned with how to most efficiently and systematically approach this to the letter. They will basically make you forget that you're there for the meaning, and the work that you put in won't go to waste for as long as you're trying to understand the suttas. Doesn't matter if you read from the middle or from the back or from the beginning. But if you yourself find some sort of, like what you just said, sounds to me already like some system you have. You started reading, then you started writing the notes down, then you go back to it, then you read again, then you compare the notes, then maybe you write some more notes. There's nothing wrong with that. So basically, whatever system you have should be guided by that effort to understand the meaning of the suttas. Not like, hey, I want to implement this system because it sounds intellectually pleasing to me, that it might work, but I'm not actually doing it from the point of view of the meaning is the first. That's where my effort is rooted. So you could just, for somebody, it might be already quite systematic to say, just read the suttas from the beginning till the end. That's it. That's already a form of a system. But I think, as I said, what you're doing sounds perfectly fine. Take a Nikaya, read it, write down the notes, and you'll see, like, some suttas will stand for you more than the other suttas. And that's when you go back to them, compare the notes, find different translations, kind of go deeper into Pali maybe to see if there's something you're missing, some nuances, and keep doing that and keep repeating that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I guess what I was maybe looking for is, after a while you see that there are suttas that are quite similar in many ways, and that there are certain, of course, parts and chunks of suttas that repeat in different suttas. So this is something that I was thinking of, maybe, whether they're possibly useful, and I'm guessing there are, either traditional or maybe even scholarly ways of grouping suttas, so that, for instance, when you read one, you read 2 or 3 additional suttas that are similar, that cover similar ground or something like that, so that it's more, I don't know, it's more focused or more thematically congruous in a certain sense.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is something that I was thinking of, or because right now I'm doing what you basically described. So trying to read the suttas, trying to understand them, jot down the structures, the main notions, and then figure out these parallels myself. Yes, I've been using occasionally the Sutta Central, but still, you have so many ways as to how you can approach this. So I was just curious whether Bhante had some
No, not specifically. No, just any tools you can get, they would aid. But again, it all comes down to, if you understand any sutta fully, relevant sutta, you'll be at least a sotapanna. So it's not a question of thematically collecting the most suttas that increases your chance or something. It's basically how you attend them, and how much of your current views are obstructing your understanding. That's what the issue is. So if you just keep drilling through reading the suttas, either thematically or individually, it doesn't matter. That's what counts. That repetitive effort. But see, what you're suggesting now, it's great if somebody were to do it. But it often becomes a distraction for people in a sense. Wow, it would be great if somebody thematically orders a sutta, so let me spend 6 months now thematically ordering the suttas. And people do that. And they think, I'm still working with the suttas. I'm still getting... No, you're not. No, you're absolutely just externally collecting these things without opening to look what's inside. And that's when scholarly attitude takes over. And that's the danger of it. So if you end up arranging them thematically through your own actual individual attempts to understand, that's fine. But don't assume it as some sort of an external occupation project that's worthwhile doing. I mean, sure, it might make you some merit if somebody else comes and reads those suttas and gets the right view on account of it, but I'm pretty sure that's not why you would be doing it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I would have a perhaps even more specific or concrete question. It's a hermeneutic question of sorts, and it comes often in the suttas, and I was just wondering how you would suggest one goes about understanding this. So let me give you an example. There are certain circularities within the suttas, which one finds, well, they are, one could say, logically problematic, and they don't really get called out in the suttas. So, for instance, in the Right View Sutta, where you have these different explanations of what is right view. There are several different categories. And the first category, for instance, is understanding unwholesome and the root of unwholesome, and then wholesome and the root of unwholesome. And then when Satiputta, I think that he's the main protagonist in this sutta, explains what unwholesome is. He says killing of living beings, taking what is not given, and so on and so forth. And he ends with and wrong view. And then when he says what is wholesome, he says not killing living beings, not taking what is not given, and the right view. So the problem here is obvious. So you want to know what the right view is, and the answer is you have to understand the wholesome and the unwholesome. And when you define the wholesome and the unwholesome, you define it by mentioning the right view and the wrong view. So you have to have the right view in order to be able to understand the right view, which is a clear example of circularity, which is of course problematic. And there are several. This is just one example.
So, that example, for example, it's not quite what you say, because it's not that he only says that. It's not that he says the right view is the wholesome is the right view and the right view is the wholesome and full stop. He gives you a whole list of things that are also unwholesome. So there's plenty of you to do. And if you do that, then you get to see that the remaining bit, even when you were doing everything else that was wholesome, was your wrong view. In other words, it's a vicious circle. In the same sense that, a heroin addict will cease to be an addict if he stops taking heroin, because of which he's an addict, which is why he keeps taking the heroin, which is why he's an addict. All he needs to do is stop doing that vicious circle. Not just a question of finding like a logical basis for it, it's to see that everything else that Sariputta listed there are things to be done and understood. And that in itself will undo that last thing which is to be done and understood, the wrong view, because of which you have the wrong view. Or when people say, well, the Buddha said desire is bad, but isn't the desire for arahantship also bad, so thus I shouldn't desire arahantship? Well, he didn't quite say desire is bad in itself, regardless of where you aim it. So desire that perpetuates desire is bad, desire that can end in cessation of desire is good. As I gave the example, I don't know if it was in the recording or in person with somebody, desire to become healthy while you're ill is still your ill man's desire. But it's actually desire that can make you seek out and find a doctor. It will make you follow the certain diet. It will make you take the medicine. It will result then in your curing, complete curation, and freedom from desire. So desire did end the desire. And that's not a contradiction.
Okay, I see that, and I think I understand this point. But there are many examples where you would have a certain notion that is, say, conditioned by something else. For instance, you might say contact is, I'm not sure whether this is the appropriate sequence, but you might say that contact is conditioned by matter and form, and then when you describe what constitutes form, you will mention, for instance, contact or something like that. So you might have it's in the same sutta. So you have a certain phenomenon which is conditioned by something else, and then when you unpack this, what's conditioning this, it's basically the same phenomenon.
Yeah, because things are not linear. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's basically all, as it was described in Namarupa determines Vijnana in the same Paticcasamuppada, and Vijnana determines Namarupa. So how's that possible? Logically, that's impossible. Either one thing depends on the other, or the other depends on this one. But you can't say, well, this depends on the other. When you look at that one, it depends on the other one. So consciousness determines name and form determines consciousness. How's that possible? Well, you understand that, you understood the principle of Paticcasamuppada. Means you got the right view. And what's the principle of Paticcasamuppada is, with this is. So two simultaneously present things at the same time, but not on the same level. The problem of logical circularity is when you assume they're on the same level. And then it doesn't make sense. But they're not on the same level. That's why Dhamma precedes the logic. That doesn't mean Dhamma is illogical. That which is illogical is that which denies the logic. Dhamma doesn't deny the logic, it just precedes it, even deeper, structurally.
Is it a bit like moving from 2D into 3D? Sorry.
Yeah, supposedly. But even that, see, you are now the observer of the 3D. This is even harder because moving from 2D, you are the 3D. So you can't step outside and see yourself looking at the 2D.
No, not like that. Yeah.
I know. But I'm just saying, even that example can be taken in a linear way on the same level. 2D, 3D, doesn't matter. The point is, you have to involve that other part of your being, which is usually, which is that which attends to the logic. But you mustn't dismiss the logic either. See, sometimes people understood this, and then they go too much the other way and dismiss the reason. And the Buddha never did that. And you shouldn't be doing that, because you dismiss the reason, you will be shooting yourself in the foot. No, this is the reasonable and reasoning whereby you recognize your situation. How do you find a way out that's not involving mere reasoning? That also involves that pretty much the emotional side of your being that can then be cooled down and uprooted from passion and so on without forsaking and sacrificing reason. And you get that in other forms of Buddhism when they got this sense, but then they completely dismiss the reason. and started saying nonsense pretty much, just absolute contradictions, just to throw you off because too much thinking is the problem. It's not the problem. Ignorance is the problem. Passion is the problem, aversion is the problem, delusion is the problem. Thinking was never the problem.
Would you say that then this specific example that you mentioned of the consciousness conditioning the Namarupa and Namarupa conditioning the consciousness, would you say that basically this is a way of expressing the idea that, say, the dynamics of existence are something that basically you cannot surpass, in the sense of that you will find something more stable than this, and once you have this dynamism, this is basically what is the only ground, the dynamic ground that you can find or get as close to as possible. Asking for something that is more fundamental or more stable or having a more unilateral ground, so to speak, is almost the same as having a coin with two sides that is circling around and asking, but which side is the ground? And it's basically a non-question, because these aspects are...
Well, in a way, yes. But the thing is, see, even your statement now sounds a bit like a way of repossessing that ground on an external level.
I understand.
As a sense of safety.
But just,
so you want to contemplate consciousness and name and form. You don't do that on a leveled platform as you would do with logic A and logical thing B. You do it by, if you are thinking about yourself being conscious, that is undermined by your name and form. If you are thinking about your name and form, that is undermined by your consciousness at the same time. So you can't think those two things at the same time on the same level. You either attend one, which means it's undermined by the other. And that's the principle. Understanding the other without trying to attend it directly. Because then it will become another one and something else, and the other thing would be undermining it.
It's basically like the figure ground thing. You can have the figure without the ground, but once you switch something to become a figure, the other thing becomes a ground, but you cannot get away from this dynamic, so to speak.
No, that's impossible.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Maybe along completely different lines. The feeling, some circularity maybe in this, but maybe not. Well, let's take a look. I think our main issue is some sort of anxiety and panic, right? Anxiety, panic. This is how we were brought up. Constant achievement is what counts. Constantly looking outside. The feelings of obligation, guilt, etc. So everything kind of feeds up into that anxiety and panic. Now that can, of course, result in wonderful achievements, which mean absolutely nothing once they are either gone or once you are mentally exhausted. That means nothing then. So it's kind of the panic that we are kind of trying to surpass, trying to appease the mind, gladden the mind. I've heard this expression in various Dhamma talks as well. Gladden the mind, letting things cool off. At the same time, you can see in sutras as well, kind of the message of urgency, where you have examples such as how extremely rare it is to be given a human birth. How extremely rare it is, and how lucky you should consider yourself to be if you encounter the Dhamma in this life. And that kind of, in my case anyway, feeds into the panic, the enlightenment panic. Do you see the connection?
Yeah, it should. Well, the thing is, first with the gladdening of the mind, I guess there are two ways you can go about it. So, I don't know, imagine you stick your hand into burning fire, and it burns, and then you pour the cold water over your hand while it's still in the burning fire. So you are gladdening your hand from the burning embers, but you're not letting go of the burning embers. So that's one way of gladdening. Another way of gladdening is get your hand out of the fire and don't put it back in. And it will calm down, cool off, and be glad that it's not burning anymore. So again, it comes down to when people don't really review their actions, don't keep an eye on them, don't keep themselves in check in terms of their, life engagements, and then want to do this gladdening and jhana practice just basically as a paste over an infected wound. I was like, that's not going to change anything. And that's certainly not what the Buddha was teaching. So gladdening the mind is done by pretty much removing the mind from things that perturb it, in a sense. So actions that are overwhelming you, that are piling up, maybe you should revise and see whether it's all worth it, to what extent it's worth it. And as I said in the beginning of this talk, draw a line for yourself, because otherwise it's endless. And which then brings to the second point, is saying this, a rare opportunity to be a human and hear the Dhamma. Yes, but that's not the blessing part. The blessing is if you make the effort and understand the Dhamma. If you just heard the Dhamma, that's it. So what? Made no difference to whether there's right view or not. But people like to think that just hearing the Dhamma somehow purifies them. It doesn't. The actions, the virtue, that's what purifies you. The mindfulness. So that's what you want to be developing. So you can feel blessed that you are able to hear the Dhamma, but I think it's more correct to feel what you are feeling, which is sense of urgency, because it's not just about hearing the Dhamma, it's about practicing it. And yeah, it is a rare opportunity to practice it. So practice it.
Yeah.
No, it's just I kind of saw myself in this now because I'm a complete noob and beginner. I know nothing about the suttas and stuff. I've never meditated, and basically what I'm looking for is a kind of tool to manage my stress and panic. So it's not something that I can take and do just in those times when the panic comes. I guess it's something you have to do and commit to.
Well, the closest to a tool you would get that would really work all the time is start just on a daily basis practicing mindfulness of in terms of motivation behind your action, any action, not just work, anything you want to do. Know for yourself why you want to do it. So force your mind to go in that slightly broader perspective, whereby it starts having a better overview of your situation. What you want to do now is you want to find a tool that will, if you engage with it, it will make the stress go away, and then you go back to it, and then when the stress builds up, you want to, which is basically you want take a pill to take the pain away, but not remove the underlying cause for the pain.
Well, I'd like to remove that as well, yeah.
Well, that's the thing. You can't remove that for as long as you're too occupied with managing the symptoms. So sometimes you have to allow the symptoms to manifest to see how deeply the problem goes. But if you're too busy just treating immediate headache, you won't know what other symptoms follow. So you won't know what condition you have. You might just think you have a headache, but you might have something much more. So the symptoms, as I said, you can manage if it's too much, but fundamentally you want to understand what's behind it. So the stress you're experiencing and so on, and the panic, is the result of life in general. So it's unavoidable. That's the first thing. So what can you avoid, and what you can do within that is make sure your actions are not rooted in unwholesome. They would then be fueling that stress even more and taking it out of your hands. And the only way you can know whether your actions are rooted in, wholesome or unwholesome, in too much desire, in anger, in ill will, in things that are not good for the mind, you will know if your actions are rooted in that, if you basically start seeing what is the motivation behind any action you're doing. Behind things you want to say, actions you want to perform, things you allow your mind to think. All of that has to be rooted in something, in some desire or the other. And that's what you want to start to pay attention to.
have this horrible feeling. You can't stay put, you can't sit, you have to get up and walk and think about the thoughts that you have. Is like, how could I do this? What happened? How am I going to fix this? And you can't stop your mind going into this spiral. What do you do in that
well,
situation?
you see that condition is not the problem. That's the result of the problem. So when the panic comes on that level, that's the result of everything else before. Or when the panic wasn't there, you haven't kept your mind in check. When things were good, when things were going your way, you haven't kept your mind in check, and you should have done the same. So now when things have changed, that mind that you haven't kept in check overwhelms you. So at that point, you make sure you don't do anything on account of that panic until the panic goes away. And then when the panic goes away, that's when you do the work. Okay, so now I'll be careful, not just in regard to panic and other things, but in regard to things that I deem to be good and acceptable and I have right to, and so on. So, like again, mind is a wild animal. I say that often. Or how wild it is how wild you let it be. So if you let that animal roam around when it wants, it's only going to be relatively tamed. So when something upsets it, when circumstances pressure it, it will turn against you, because that's what a wild dog would do. He has no respect, and it certainly does not see you as somebody who is in charge, because you never made yourself in charge. Of your own mind, not of the circumstances around you. So that's what you do. Start taming it.
How?
Yeah, as I said, be aware of your motivation behind your actions, even when the actions are good. That doesn't mean you should be ignorant of the reasons for you doing it. Be mindful of your behavior. Don't do anything on account of greed, aversion, ill will, malice. Even if it feels right to say something, if it's rooted in unwholesome in your mind, you don't do it. So you don't use the external world for the criteria of what should be done. You use your state of mind as the criteria for what should be done. So it's going to take time to develop that. But again, the problems you're having are not problems that were created overnight either. So in the same sense, it's going to take time to unwind them.
A lot of work to do.
Well, yeah, but see, at least recognizing that this is work to be done, that's a good first step. Many people just refuse to accept even that. No, they still just want the pill to manage the symptoms. And for that, you don't really need Buddha's teaching. Any distraction is already a form of pill, which is why the condition gets worse, because you just keep managing the headache of it.
So if you're constantly monitoring your intentions, your motivation, what drives your actions, your speech, your everything, then when a panic hits, or then you're pretty sure that you've done everything right? Because you have.
Well, you would at least be less doubtful about it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the aggregate of virtue and the proper behavior that if you actually develop beforehand, you don't see the benefit at the time necessarily. There is no immediate, great reward and permanent perpetual sunshine because you're virtuous. But yes, when the mind goes into those states, you realize you're not as moved as much, and now you know why. Because your behavior has been kept in check and purified beforehand. And also, if you keep an eye on these things, you will reevaluate even things that you think are important to you now, which on account of which you suffer, basically. When you separated from things you want, united with things you don't want, it's the basis of suffering. So you will reevaluate what you want and what you don't want as well. And, where you should be and what a good life is. Most of those things people don't really sit down and think about in great depth. They just assume it, take it at a face value, then add a new face value to it, then go through life with it, then add a new face value. Just keep kind of piling on of these random values that if you stop and think about it, you realize, I don't really even care about these things. Or not as much as I thought I did.
I think you were just speaking about similar things with another monk that the video was just published on YouTube, and I was listening to half of it. It was about emotions, how to deal with emotions, and I thought it was really helpful. And one thing that you said kind of stuck with me, and you said that the emotions are there, but they're not mine per se. It's not something that I have.
You're subjected to them, and they become yours when you act out of them. When you take them for granted, when you can't help yourself, and you act either for prolonging the good ones or getting rid of the bad ones, they're basically a bait that hooks you. But if you keep your behavior in check, your speech, your mind, a tedious process in the beginning, I know, you are creating a container now. They will prevent you pretty much from jumping into that gratuitous ownership of what feelings arose in you that you had no say in. But you can't just choose when the feeling is there to say, I don't own this, because it's not a matter of choice. It's a result of prior development or a lack of it.
I find this very helpful when panic strikes, to be in the body, to observe what's happening, to be living through what's happening.
Well, see, there's another thing now that you said that. The panic strikes. Why?
Yeah.
Why is there a need? No. Why is there a need to get rid of the panic when it comes? Why is there an automatic need to not have this?
This is probably something very innate to all human beings. We want to get rid of it.
Well, see now, how do you know that? Have you investigated every human being and arrived at a conclusion?
No, but...
From your point of view, the attitude of not accepting panic, immediately want to get rid of it, which is what, incidentally, makes the panic worse.
Yeah.
Why is that? So what? Innate human ability to make its own panic worse. That doesn't sound like an evolution.
Isn't that strange? So you first want to react. You want to call somebody. You want to write that email. You want to do that. Yeah. First do something. Then you.
Because you want to get rid of the pain behind it. Because it's very unpleasant.
It's very unpleasant, and then you can develop tics. There are all sorts of things. But
sure.
Then when you kind of accept
so
it,
that's what I'm saying. Panic is like an extreme scenario of your day-to-day life. If you have not been cultivating mind that wants to get rid of discomfort whenever it arises, that would not have been your first port of call when panic manifests. It's a habit that you are cultivating. So that's why I said, endure the panic until it subsides, and then keep an eye, basically, on what you do, because that's the root of the problem. And if you stop habitually, just try to get rid of discomfort or not think about it and so on, or prolong the pleasure and not think about it, you are creating more and more space for you to hold that panic without panicking. Because panic is not measured by how much panic you feel. Panic is measured by how much of that panic moves you around. And that was the whole point of that emotions talk. It's not about not having emotions of good or bad kind. It's about being moved by them and acting out of them. That's how you measure the problem, not by what you felt.
Perhaps break down a given phenomenon, say either pain or anxiety, whichever you prefer, so that we do it a bit more analytically. Here's a first attempt. So there is a certain quality, say, of a feeling which manifests itself in a specific way. You know what is pain, you know what is anxiety, and so on and so forth, right? But we often conflate this specific quality also with our tendency to respond to that particular quality. So we see, we have a certain emotive texture, and immediately, because things happen so quickly, we tend to think, well, anxiety, and then everything that follows, this is part of it. But this is precisely not the case, not the point, right? The point is that there is...
but also, hold on, before we go too far, it's also...
Yes.
It's not quite the way you describe it, because, well, whether it's anxiety, whether it's panic, whether it's any of those states you list, what do they all have in common? They're felt unpleasantly, and they remain to be felt unpleasantly throughout your experience of them. So it's not that first moment that you made a mistake and acted out of it. See, if a panic, halfway through panic, ceases to be painful, it will cease to be panic.
Yes.
And you would not have to stop yourself from acting and fixing it because you don't feel the panic anymore. Which means it's not a momentary reaction, it's more like you are under the pressure of that same discomfort throughout. If the panic lasts for hours, it's the same discomfort.
Yes, okay, I agree with
so
I mean,
at that level, you must endure it. Not like, oh, if I didn't act back then or next time I won't act in the beginning, doesn't matter.
I understand.
For the duration of the discomfort, you should remain basically aware of it and not act out of it.
Okay, yes, I understand it. So maybe I phrased it awkwardly or wrongly in the sense of that it sounded as if it was a point in time. I just meant it could be even spread out temporally, as you described.
Sure.
There is a certain quality of unpleasantness that is there, or a quality of painfulness, maybe.
Yeah.
But then there is this other segment of, what would we call it? Would we call it, so that there is a quality of painfulness or anxiety or what have you, and then there's this responsive element of me trying to push or get rid of this, right? Like this reactive segment that we often conflate. We think that this, like Martina said, well, this is how we respond. But to a certain degree, that's true. But also you see that there is a segment there where
that segment is what you're responsible for. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not to say, as I said, it's a matter of conscious choice. You can just stop it, but it is your doing. Either has been accumulated over a period of time of not keeping yourself in check. So if you unaccumulate it, it will cease. That response will cease. But yes, it is. Yes, that whole automatic response of I don't want this, that's not part of the feeling. That's not part of the panic either.
But would you say that, a capable or a well-developed disciple, does he or she still experience pain definitely, for sure? But
well,
panic
it experience some sort of discomfort, but you wouldn't use the same word panic that you use for somebody who is not experienced and developed disciple, because as I said, panic is when you are panicked. When you took the ownership of it, you are moved by it, you're acting out of it, you're trying to get rid of the discomfort blindly. If you don't do those things, that panic will cease to be making you panic. So you could say that overall phenomenon, that discomfort, that uncomfortable experience is still there. The threat is there, the risk is there, but the pressure behind it that was making you lose perspective, that's not there. Because now your perspective is greater.
Yeah. I understand, because in a certain sense, what we were now describing analytically, what we call panic, after all, is the whole phenomenon. It is you that basically, in a certain sense, create panic. There is the element of unpleasantness, the quality there is, and this will remain. For instance, if I understand correctly, this has also been my experience through the years of, for example.
No, exactly. That's why the most practical thing you can do is stop thinking you must get rid of it. Stop thinking I must prevent this from even arising because it's so unpleasant. No. And nobody can avoid that. One way or the other, it comes, anxiety, unless the mind is enlightened. So your duty is not to not experience it, to prevent it from arising, to make it go away as quickly as possible. Your duty is to not be moved by it for as long as it lasts. That's it. And incidentally, that will make it go away. But not on your own terms. And it's that inability to give up that my own terms, that's why you're still subjected to it.
There's a corollary question to this. This is something that it's become more interesting or important for me now. Would you agree that there's also an interesting story to be said about this particular quality? So we talked about panic itself when it manifests itself in the acute manner sense that Mariana and Martina were talking about. But there's this quality. And would you say that this particular quality of unpleasantness, is something that arises against the background of conditions which are related to you living an unwholesome life? This was my experience. That if I, as you said, proceed to try to the best of my ability to realize and manifest the qualities, the wholesome qualities, then the frequency the frequency of these the unpleasant quality manifesting itself diminishes greatly or completely disappears. As long as I am somehow capable of maintaining this, then this becomes significantly reduced. Right. I wouldn't say that completely. So this is something that I think is also important. So that there's this one way of coping with panic that we've described, but then also what do you do with the quality? So how do you reduce the negative the frequency of this negative quality appearing in
but
your
you
life?
don't. Why would you want to reduce that if it doesn't bother you in the first place anymore?
Because you still are able to differentiate between this particular quality and the quality, say, of well-being, which is
right. But no, obviously if you are not causing the panic yourself, and the panic manifests, it's not your doing. So you trying to manage that preemptively means you still know you're not free from the pressure of it. That's why you still value if the thing doesn't even arise. No, you need to be completely indifferent towards manifestation of panic. And by that I mean you need to be completely unmoved by it. So that's where I disagree. Your virtuous behavior in wholesome life does not reduce the frequency necessarily. Maybe some actions, maybe the environment you live in, that's contributing to frequency and so on. What that does reduce, your wholesome behavior, is the extent of oscillation of your mind on account of it. Before it would swing from one wall to the other, now it barely kind of shudders a little bit and then it goes away and it doesn't care. It doesn't move. Not that the problem is not there. It's just you are now able to not act out of that irrational pressure, which when you act out of makes the pressure worse. In the same sense, like when you're kids and you're afraid of the dark, the fear doesn't overwhelm you until you choose to start running. That's when you really get scared, when you start running. But if you don't start running, the pressure's there, but it doesn't overwhelm you. But if you don't want even that pressure to be there, that's when the fear enters you. And there is a fear and dread sutta where the Buddha was describing exactly the same. He would go to the places basically where no people go, only wild beasts, and he's doing walking meditation at night, and if there will be a sound or something nearby, his mind will think, here is that dangerous, deadly thing coming your way now. And he said, I wouldn't change my position. In other words, he wouldn't stop walking until he first dispels that urgency to act out of that fear. Because if he acts out of that fear, if he sits down or hides or something, well, he just gave in to the fear. Obviously, that's what he was describing is on a much subtler level, but it's the same principle. You are not afraid by feeling pressure. You are not panicked by feeling that pressure of anxiety. You are panicked by acting out of it and trying to outrun it. So, how much you move by it, that's the problem, not what has manifested for you.
Okay, the way that you now put it, it might be the case that because of the virtuous background makes your confrontation with the quality less problematic, the quality itself ends up. So yeah.
And that's why often you have in the suttas, like for an arahant's problems still kept coming. And the Buddha would say, oh, it's because of the previous karma or something. The qualities would still keep coming for whatever reason, for stuff they did or said, but no pressure would be there for them. And the mind wouldn't move either way. But it's not that they never experienced problem on that factual level in terms of, discomfort or issues and so on. So that's what I'm saying. Even if it's the extreme panic, the point is you recognize, okay, it's not supposed to not be here. It's not supposed to not be felt like this. The only thing I'm not supposed to do is keep perpetuating it through my rational actions on account of it. So, as bad as it is, let me wait it out, literally. Not ignore it. Just wait for it to subside. And then if I still want to do the same thing I wanted to do when I was all panicked, I'll do it, but it won't be rooted in panic. But if I keep doing it in panic, it keeps adding to the panic. And that's the painful development there, that you have to endure it. Because it feels like, well, if I just start running, the danger will be left behind. But no, it won't. Because now the danger enters you through that fear that you created through your running. And you would start running when you have a view or have a degree of entitlement that you shouldn't be feeling that pressure in the first place. And that's not up to you to decide. That's up to the elements, the aggregates, and the circumstances. It's whether you act out of it or not, that's up to you. So even when people want to manage panic, that's fine, but don't manage it by trying to not have it or prevent it or get rid of it. Manage it by keeping yourself in control while it's there. Manage it by learning how to endure it. Manage it by removing the view that makes you think you shouldn't feel it in the first place. Because that's completely not true.
I would have a different question if nobody has anything else, but in the traditional setting, the notion or the idea related to later births that could happen in different realms of being or existence provided in a certain sense a framework that would allow someone, for example, a lay person or a disciple who felt that maybe he is not progressing as much as he could have, a certain hope or a certain solace that, I don't know, maybe he will be born in a realm that is beneficial, in one of the realms of the God. But someone who has grown up in the contemporary Western society usually has severe difficulties accepting this story, this narrative, this context. So for that person, it's almost like being or walking on the razor's edge, which in a certain sense is good. This feeling of some vega, of existential angst. And, you either fall on the one side or you fall on the other side or whatever. So, damnation there, and enlightenment on the razor's edge. But would you say, what would your approach be to this? Would you try to somehow, for example, help someone in the West to enter into this framework, the traditional Buddhist framework of different realms of beings and existence, of gods and demons? And if you would, how would you do this? How would you bring these phenomena closer to someone? Or would you insist, or would you rather have that person have this feeling of walking on the razor's edge and just,
Well, no, I don't think I would bring it to them, because it would be it wouldn't be practical, really. It would be just making them adopt one set of external belief on account of another one. So the most you can do is make sure that they are aware of the responsibility behind their actions and the result that they can see in this life. And then say, if you behave in this way, you will benefit in this life. Say, if you practice sense restraint, you will develop patience, you will develop tolerance, your mind will not move in the face of panic, great things. Everybody values those things. So you win in this life on account of being virtuous, keeping the precepts, practicing mindfulness. Plus, the same teacher who gave these instructions, that you can verify here and now, said if you practice these instructions here and now, you get a future reward as well, but you don't have to worry about that. So it's a win-win either way.
It's a bit of a Pascal there, right?
Well, no. I just actually did a video on that. I haven't posted it yet. Pascal didn't see the benefit. Pascal referred to it as finite loss. But why is sense restraint a loss when you gain from it, even here? Pascal thought that refraining from sensuality is a factual loss for which you might be rewarded later. But the Buddha said refraining from sensuality is a factual gain from which you might be rewarded later. So it's the opposite of Pascal's wager. Do you see the difference there?
Yeah, I see the difference.
Because people often struggle. Yeah, but see, why should I forsake my sense desires here? I don't see the benefit. For the sake of forsaking them. Do you think you develop patience by scratching an itch like a wild animal? Or by refraining from scratching the itch? Again, common wisdom. Who has a greater chance of success, even in life? Person who has a better context on account of refraining from impulsive action, or a person who always acts impulsively and doesn't care about the results of their action in this life? So Pascal was wrong. There's no loss either way. Sense restraint, virtue, keeping your sense desires in check, it's a gain either way. And yeah,
if
you keep a little bit in check, you win a little bit. Doesn't mean, so I must forsake the life and be celibate for the rest of my life. If that's what you want to do, sure. And to that extent, you probably have a greater chance of even bigger peace if you do it. But again, in the most mundane terms, people who want to succeed in life, succeed in family, who is better off? The one who has work ethic, who doesn't just follow his desires, who is able to hold back, who is able to contain himself, who is able to have perspective on his situation despite the pressuring pull of I want this, I don't want that, or the one who is the opposite to that, or the one who is just scratching the itch and chases after what it takes its fancy. So it's a win-win either way. Because those very things you've done in the next life will reward you, if there is one.
Here immediately somebody, if we're already talking on this particular level, somebody might bring up, someone like, I don't know, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whatnot, and they are not particularly virtuous people. They're hyper, billionaires and extremely influential. They seem to be enjoying their life in many different ways. And somebody might say, why would I want to, forsake these things? Why would I not want to scratch the itch if scratching the itch might allow me to be the person who, and I'm playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, I know. Well, because Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos or whoever got there by not scratching their itch. They got there by working, by not giving into the immediate desire and having a bigger picture of a greater reward later. They got there because they were sense restrained for one reason or the other. So, yeah, that's the argument that you gave yourself as a devil's advocate. That's why you shouldn't do it, because those very people didn't do it.
But they lack wisdom. Is that?
Yeah, sure. We're not talking about wisdom now.
Okay.
We're talking about how much you allow yourself to go down the pathway of sensual desire and acting out of an impulse, which is often always basically kind of the point that people come to when they speak about the next life. Well, why should I be virtuous? Why should I say no to these things? This is why, because you benefit in this life on account of it. But people, even as I said, the most mundane people you just listed, I'm sure they do recognize what has resulted or what has brought those results for them. They know that it wasn't, staying late at night and partying with their frat mates and so on. It was the opposite. And how many people are able to do the opposite? Well, not many. That's why not many are billionaires. Because it's hard to restrain at that point and keep this far removed, distant picture that it's still 50-50 at best in mind as your goal. No, just give me something immediately now. That's what I want. And that's exactly why you're basically subjected then to the same desires on and on and on and on. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I would just kind of reminded me of something that I was discussing with my friend the other day. It was we were discussing how we tend to compare ourselves to others whom we see as more successful, more beautiful, more influential. But what we don't know is the way they are experiencing themselves.
Well, exactly. No, I just took the argument at a face value. And even in that case, I wanted to say that even they are, they might not see the value of how they went about it. But again, if somebody does make the effort and practice sense restraint, they will benefit in this life through developing mental states. They will be more conducive to their own peace. But yes, what you're saying now is exactly the point. Somebody might be a millionaire, but that's not the measure of his success internally at all. Like, you could imagine yourself being a millionaire that's extremely miserable. And what would you take? Like, what would be better for you? To not be a millionaire and be very contented and happy, or to be a millionaire and be absolutely like a wreck? Everybody already what you would choose. So that's the whole point here. But mental states will determine basically your happiness. And that's another thing that you can recognize in the most mundane setting. What results in better, calming, more contented, more self-sufficient mental states? Is it chasing after desires like a wild dog, or actually being able to hold back and control myself, keep myself in check? Because otherwise I'm going to enter a rabbit hole and I won't be able to leave for a while, and it's going to be very unpleasant, like it's been so many times before. So in the most mundane, basic wisdom, non-Buddhist practice, anybody can see this for themselves. It's still beneficial.
What are some of the exercises that you can do, or how can you train your mind, like daily, every day that you do that?
Well, you can familiarize yourself with the precepts, 5 precepts, 8 precepts in Buddhism, which is basically the modes of behavior, things to not do and be mindful of. And that's pretty much the context of your exercises. Then everything else that day throws at you, it's seen against those. Or is this according to the precepts or against the precepts? And there is no budging there. You don't compromise the framework of the precepts. Because by developing your behavior in that sense, setting boundaries and the correct framework, then your speech will follow, and then you'll be able to do the same to your mind. But you can't bypass body, speech, and then just affect the mind, which is where the problem is, yes. But in order to arrive at it, to be able to deal with it, you need to take it up from the roots.
And then eventually you come to the mind, right? This is where the problem is. And I like what you just said, just wrote it down in the chat. So you said your mind will not move in the face of panic. So you didn't say you will not experience panic.
No, exactly.
I like that, yes.
Well, that's important because people think I must not be experiencing this. Mm-hmm. And that's why you're experiencing it.
Yeah.
Oh, this fire shouldn't be here, so you stick your hands and try to get rid of the fire, and that's why that fire is a problem for you. If you stop touching it, it will stop burning you. And it will burn itself out, and there was no problem. The problem was you jumping into it, trying to get rid of it. But you can't, as I said, just decide to not jump into it, because that's your mode of behavior throughout the day. Discomfort, jump into it to get rid of it. Comfort, jump into it to prolong it. So the precepts are the framework, and that's where your mindfulness and composure comes from. And none of the experiences should change in that sense. It's how much you're moved on account of it. That's what will change.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same thing with desires. Of course, we see something that we like.
Yeah.
Because you have this somehow ingrained in your mind. If it feels good, I should be able to do it, right? Yeah. I should allow myself to do it because it feels good. It's good for me. Yeah. It's not really good for you in the long run.
And again, you won't be able to not allow yourself just everything overnight or something. But the point is to not lose the sight of your responsibility for allowing yourself. Oh, it feels good, so I should do it. Thus, I will be responsible for doing it. Okay, so shall I do it? Well, maybe let me reconsider, because now I feel the weight of those actions on me. And then sometimes when you do it, you'll do it responsibly. When you don't do it, you will be equally responsible and aware of it. But it's when people act out of their view, which is pretty much like a sense of entitlement. Oh, it's fine. Like, why would I? There's no problem with this. And it's not my fault that I'm feeling it. And it's not my fault that I'm acting out of it. And I'm not responsible for it. It's just acting, reacting, and so on. And that view has to change. So you're not responsible for panic or for pleasure coming your way, but you're certainly responsible for what you do on account of it. Beings are owners of their actions. Beings are not owners of the, feelings and panics and anxieties and pleasures that come their way, but they're owners of what they do on account of it.
Wonderful. I think you have wrapped it up really nicely. I'm not sure if there's any follow-up questions.
Maybe one that is related to this. Actions and intentions. So it would seem that the notion of Kamma in Buddhism is related not to, say, the specific concrete actions that you perform, but the behavioral intentions that you, so the way you polarize yourself towards a certain something. So the attitude itself is, in a certain sense, the rudimentary and crucial aspect in this, right?
Yeah, that's what Buddha said. Every action is intention.
Okay, yeah. So could you maybe just slightly elaborate on this? So what exactly does this mean, and how you conceive of it? Why it might be significant? I mean, there are certain things that I already kind of, took from this, but I would just like to.
Well, it basically means that your intention behind the actions determines whether that action is wholesome or not. Sure, some obvious actions are unwholesome and cannot be done with a wholesome intention, such as killing, stealing, lying, cheating, and so on. You can't do that for good. Doesn't matter what you tell yourself. It has to be rooted in that individual unwholesome intention. But certain, like if it's not those extreme things, most of the other actions are determined basically by your intention. So as I gave many similes before, you could say, well, going to a monastery is a good thing. Not by itself. It's good if your intention to go to a monastery is rooted in good. Good reason, good purpose, not for something unwholesome. But if it is, then it's not good. So if you go to the monastery to basically, learn the Dhamma, yeah, that's good, because that can bring further wisdom and so on. But if you go to monastery to, socialize, steal, spend time, whatever else, it's the same action externally. We are talking about going to the monastery. But that's not what determines whether it's good or bad. But people do like to take the letter of the action, so to speak, as the measure of if it's good or not. No, it's good to go to the monastery. It's good to do this. Well, as I said, in those obvious examples, certain things, yes, are always good and certain things are not good. But all of this is determined by the intention behind the action of doing them. So why do you want to go to a monastery? And if you know that with yourself, you're getting to know the roots of your own actions. But if you just take the face value of going to the monastery is always good, that's it. There's no work for you. You just covered it up. There's nothing else that exists there. Just doing good means this is good. Let me not think about the reasons why I'm doing it. And incidentally, that's also why I would not try to change the Westerner's mind about, believing in heavens and rebirths and different realms, because it would be on that level. Okay, I adopt this idea and do this, and that's it. I don't need to be self-aware. No, you do need to be self-aware. Because fundamentally, the idea I gave you, how do you know it's right? You don't. But what you do know is the reasons for your actions on a day-to-day basis. You know exactly where they're rooted. Is this in desire? Is this aversion? Is this distraction, delusion? Is this non-desire, non-aversion, non-distraction, non-delusion? Will this bring more self-awareness as a result? Or will this bring the self-awareness to diminish as a result? What I am about to do. So that's why some people just use this very instruction and became arahants. When the Buddha said, just whatever you know it's unwholesome, abandon it. As in, rooted in unwholesome, don't do it. And rooted in wholesome, do it. Whatever you know that will bring the increase of unwholesome and decrease of wholesome, don't do it. And opposite. If it increases wholesome and decreases unwholesome, do it.
But can you fully understand the phenomenon of intention and Kamma without presupposing past and future birth? So the reason why I'm asking this is whether, because you said one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to go.
Well, there is. What do you mean by fully understanding the phenomenon of Kamma?
What I mean by that is, in the sense of, can you really understand the gravitas or the weight of the past conditions?
No, only relatively. Nobody can. Only the Buddha could understand that. And he himself said, trying to think about the weights, the workings of the Kamma and how it happened and the results that are waiting, will only bring madness and distraction. No, but you can directly see for yourself that by not giving into the unwholesome kinds of intention behind your action, your mind will move less and less in regard to things that move you, that are always felt unpleasantly. So you will have a Dhamma verifiable here and now that result in unmovability and pretty much inability to suffer on account of things that used to make you suffer. And you don't need you can't even get any theory, any theoretical answer, any magical display of workings of Kamma cannot be as direct as this proof that Dhamma is working. Where you can't suffer amidst that which makes you suffer because of your practice and restraint and mind purification developed beforehand.
Okay, so basically...
Visible here and now.
Okay. I guess... that's probably a good point, and it probably circumvents all the,
everything else is second to it. Exactly.
Yeah. The prototypical objections of, you have bad people and then they're prosperous and contra.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Prosperity does not mean happiness.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you walk the hills. I've seen you walk mountains. You seem to be very outdoorsy, kind of very active person. And I was just wondering, while you're on your hikes, on your walks, what do you do? Are you mindful of your body during that walk? Do you kind of make a practice out of it, or?
No, I tend to walk fast. So basically the breathing becomes very hard and you feel like you're dying, and then the mind doesn't move in face of that. So that's my hiking practice and trekking practice. Basically expose yourself to the elements so the mind doesn't move in those extreme circumstances.
Yeah, we do a bit of sports ourselves, but so I was wondering what kind of things to incorporate while, when you're on a longer bike ride, it gets pretty boring. So it's a nice time. I'm not doing it like for in that sense, like for some pleasure or something. Like especially in Sri Lanka, when I used to go around the jungles on my own, the whole point was go through the difficult terrains that I know I cannot turn back and go back to the comfort. Once you cross that point, it will be harder to turn back than to keep going forward. And then you just have to endure it until it ends without your mind. Well, see, that's it. The mind wants to panic, the mind wants to move, the mind wants to change, the mind wants to deal with the circumstances, but you don't, you just endure it physically. So that's that purification that Buddha was talking about, during the elements, enduring discomfort. It's not some great practice that you kind of need to predetermine. You just need to expose yourself to it and see how much your mind moves.
Obviously, I remember in the beginning it was moving much more. Just the thought of doing that was moving me years ago. And you see that, like the thought of discomfort, physical, rain, cold, being stuck in the jungle and the vines and everything, leeches, I can't be bothered. And again, you don't do it blindly, or that's why I'll just do it. No, do it so to be bothered, so to not be moved by the physical body. Because what do you think? How will the illness feel when the body starts breaking apart? Joints aching, head hurting, eyes cannot see, you can barely breathe. It's going to feel exactly like that.
Yeah.
And that's why first thing you get people who are hiking is they become very grumpy.
Yeah.
They start arguing with each other as well, because they start lashing out, because it starts building up just basic discomfort. And most people are sheltered from it. So that's why I do it, so the dog become complacent. Sorry?
It's wonderful because I'm always trying to avoid the discomfort, right? I don't want to go on that bike ride. I know it's going to take a very long time. It's going to be very, very dangerous. It's going to be uphill and whatever. But then when I do it, I really enjoy that feeling, exactly what you're describing.
You can avoid the danger part. There's no need to be like life-threatening or something. But you do that endurance and once the mind stops moving in the face of that, it's not going to move into anything that's inferior to that.
Right, so I can incorporate Dhamma into many things. So I do not need that time slot after all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's it. Sorry, did you have a question as well?
Yeah.
We have a question here as well.
Yeah. Just to check if I understand you correctly with this not wanting to have panic and other stuff. So it seems to me that on the one level, it seems to me that it is sort of understandable that I don't want them because I want to be sort of enlightened. So I'd say. Not wanting, so say perceiving them as a problem, maybe not so bad, so to say, because this makes you aware that you are not enlightened now, and and this also can be then a way to so say to soothe this discomfort, soothe this desire to get rid of them, because once you remind yourself that it is sort of normal that you experience these feelings, because you're not enlightened, this is already sort of brings them down, because you don't perceive them anymore as something which should not be there. It should be there just because you're not.
I see what you mean, but no, they're not a problem. No. See, you saying that they're the problem means saying they're the suffering. But suffering is not in the phenomena, it's not in dhammas, it's not in the things. It's in your craving in regard to them. That's the first noble truth. So ironically enough, yes, enlightenment will make those things not be there. Not because they're not there, it's because you have no craving in regard to them. Because the noble truth of craving is not, there is no panic attack manifesting, there is no discomfort manifesting. The noble truth of craving is there is no resistance in discomfort left whatsoever, ever again. So the root of suffering is tanha, not the world. Things remain standing in the world, coming you. I mean, I'm sure Angulimala, when after his arahantship, when those kids threw stones and split his head open, I'm sure he felt the discomfort on account of it. Otherwise, the Buddha wouldn't have come to him and said, bear it, Brahmin, bear it. Otherwise, the results, if you didn't become an arahant, would have been far worse than what you're experiencing now. But he had no craving left. So that's why it's I know what you mean, because you could then just say, okay, so let's not make a problem out of anything and forget that you're not enlightened. But I think people that are gripped by panic attacks, they don't need reminders that they're not enlightened. They know that very well and they feel it. They need a reminder to see where the line of the problem is. And panic is not that. Your resistance to it is, which is there because of your equal non-resistance to pleasure when it's there beforehand or after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go,
okay.
follow up.
Yeah. So another thing. So let's say in the working context, so many of us find ourselves in the situations where so non-acting is, so to say, dangerous to career. So and for me, it basically means that you need to give up those to leave those contexts.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Well, that's the conflict that you in your setting need to resolve with yourself. Practice of Dhamma, you cannot be working and being a layman and fulfilling the practice of Dhamma. You can only do it in a limited manner. Because it is mutually exclusive, exactly. Because the more you do it, the more you will be sort of withdrawing yourself from all the other things you need to do. So you can't have it both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so maybe like a last question on my side. So after I started doing maybe one could call it like this practice of non-activity, just to sit down and to sit for, let's say, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, to see how the mind sort of comes down in it. I found it very very pleasant, and so I started asking myself, so is this pleasure now a problem that I'm sort of enjoying, basically, like this time? Maybe I don't know how much of it is maybe essential pleasure because I sort of allow my body to rest. Yeah. So my question is it a problem that you're experiencing pleasure on account of your?
Well, what kind of pleasure? Like contentment, mental joy.
Yeah, something like this. Yeah. So you're just the feeling that you're.
Do you become unaware of yourself on account of that pleasure? Do you become distracted? Do you feel like you woke up when that pleasure ceases, or you remain fully mindful while the pleasure's there?
I think I remain mindful of it. Yeah. So it's
so keep an eye on that. For as long as you remain mindful, and it's clearly the result of you non-engaging with your senses, it's not the pleasure you should be overly concerned with.
Yeah, but I'm asking myself, so maybe it's because I'm sitting in a chair and this is pleasant. So,
sure, it might be, but that's not the sensual pleasure. That's not the pleasure that's inducive of lust, thirst, and loss of perspective. But that is certainly the mind of doubt that's wanting to sort of move you away from that experience of non-activity. He wants to make you act. Hey, stop doing this because it actually works against the Mara's order. Start thinking about it, start worrying, start undermining it with your, mind comes up with a thought, is this? You check it, mindfulness is there, you are not actually engaging with anything. The body feels agreeable. I mean, the Buddha ate the milk rice. And indeed, those ascetics thought, look, he went back, he lost it. He uses the utmost sensuality. So to some extent, you must not torture the body all the time. But equally, what I was talking about, this hiking thing, it's like, most people would not be asking that question to themselves, but you're asking. They would probably be on the level of, I don't want to deal with the discomfort, even of the basic elemental kind, unless I really have to. And that's then their practice, is to know, actually, let me see how much will my mind move on account of things that are not threatening to my life. Like, I remember leeches in Sri Lanka, people would lose their mind on account of it. It's like, it's nothing, you can't get diseases from them, there's no permanent, it's just unpleasant and psychologically uncomfortable. And people will just like forsake any sense of reason just on account of those things. It's like, you should not be allowing that yourself, like monks, if you want to practice and so on. Because, how do you think it's going to feel when the body starts breaking apart and so on? When these little external discomforts are throwing you left and right. But then you have the other extreme where people can just go and start torturing for the sake of like self-inflicting pain because they don't know where the line is. And that's where the line is. Find the non-activity. If it's agreeable, don't lose mindfulness on account of it, and that's it. You won't be doing it. You will have to get up and do something at some point. So, and then when you go back, if it happens the same. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, my question was about physical activity, actually. In the sense, I mean, I understand everyone perceives these things differently, but for myself, I also, let's say, saw it in the sense, endurance sports, let's say, as, okay, it's first like, that's body training in a way, and the other aspect was also exposing the mind to this uncomfortable sensation and enduring it. But how to say, it can definitely strengthen the mind, but I think at some point, but that's probably like on a case-to-case basis. It can also be a distraction from neutral feeling,
of course,
I think.
sure.
So for me, it was then.
No, that's what I mean. Like as I said before, the whole point is that's the practice. Is to be able to judge where your motivation is rooted. What I said earlier, half an hour ago. You can't just say, so physical activity is always good, or that's always bad.
Yeah, but being aware of like, okay, it's meant
why
training,
are you doing
really
it for? Exactly.
Okay.
Halfway through your doing of your physical activity for strengthening your body and conditioning your mind, you ask yourself, am I still doing it for the same reasons? And then you realize, oh no, I'm doing it because I really want to beat that guy. And then you stop it. Now you clearly know that it's the reasons have changed, because reasons change, intentions change. And that's when you don't follow through with the actions on account because this is always good. That's what it means, like you take responsibility for your action. Not like you never do that. It's like you never lose the sight of why this is done in the first place.
Yeah, but in the sense that like this neutral feeling is on the more subtler level, and trying to escape it through an excuse of training the mind might be tricky.
Well, again, sometimes it can happen, but if you keep doing it, it will become apparent. And then you'll see if you're doing it for that reason. But it's equal. Again, like how do you think when back in the day the Buddhists, the monks lived around India, where they would go on foot, carry all their possessions that they had every time for days just to meet the Buddha and talk to him for 5 minutes, and then wander around. I mean, have you been in Bihar? I don't know if you've been to India, but it's not a place you want to wander around now. And I can only imagine back then how it was. I mean, today probably soldiers wouldn't be able to do that physically without all the gear and equipment and help. Yet that was like a normal life. The woman goes on a journey with her 2 kids across the entire northern India to visit her family, and get attacked by jackals and so on. That was like a normal thing. So people were tough. And today, how many people can say they can do it? Again, why you want to do it is what matters, but don't ignore the fact that some extent of it needs to be done still. Because that whole, was it Sabasa Sutta? The whole set of taints, asavas, to be abandoned by enduring. Heat, cold, hunger, exposure, and so on.